How does Andrew Tate do us a disservice?
Brannon, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay today.
Good.
Yeah, we're
Nice.
doing all right.
Yeah, you seem in a jolly mood.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good today. So
Nice.
it's one of those things where there's a lot of stuff in motion right now, and there's a lot of stress. And I know you're in that same boat with everything that's going on in your world too. But got up early this morning, did my dailies, and was just thinking about like what a good life I have. And things aren't perfect and things are rough. And actually, some of what we're going to talk about today is part of that. But it's good. Like it feels good. It feels good to be engaged in a battle for what I think is a worthy cause, and
Yep.
that's for the hearts of the men and women that we work with.
I mean, I don't you just love your career?
I feel like one of the really lucky ones where, some people go and look for a good job that provides the means they need to then go do the things they want. And I feel like as a result of life experience and the choice of career, even though it's hard and, emotionally taxing, I feel like I get to come and fulfill my purpose almost every single day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
You're engaged in a battle. You're fighting a good fight, right?
Trying to and admitting that I know that half of what I'm doing right now will probably be wrong in a while, but
Well,
I'm doing what I can with a whole heart.
we're gonna take a look at that today, just a
Yeah.
little bit, right?
Yeah.
Um, so should we dive into this?
Yeah, let's jump in and talk through this. We'll probably have to do some explanation on who is Andrew Tate and all of that stuff too. But yeah, let's dive into it.
Yeah, this discussion, just to let the cat out of the bag a little bit, is going to be about embracing masculinity, healthy masculinity, and what that actually means to us, um, and like why it's so important. Um, but we've recently got some feedback about the way that we look at masculinity, and we wanted to talk about that and give some explanation and some understanding around it. So, should
Yeah.
we start by saying by talking about who Andrew Tate is?
Yeah, or should we share the review that came through first and then talk about Andrew Tate?
Sure. Go
Yeah.
for the review.
Okay, so here's a review that just came through. It's one of our very few, which by the way, thank you to everybody who gives us reviews. This one came through on the Apple Podcasts. It's one of the very, very few one-star reviews we get. So it's kind of shocking every time we get a one star,
Which
but
we could use you guys hopping over and giving us some 5 stars to offset this 1 star.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, that just brought us down to a 4 out of five,
yeah.
which, dang it. Anyway, this actually is a review that we wanted to read. We want to read all of our reviews if we can. We appreciate reviews, and then we want to kind of tie in the Andrew Tate topic because I think it speaks to this a little bit too. So it says The Way of the Superior Man. In episode 393, which is our guest, that one, Brannon, was Ben, if you remember
Oh yeah.
Ben.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ben Gold. He's one of my main
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
Love
So
him.
yeah, in episode 393, the hosts explore one theme from David Data's book. While they highlight one theme, it's important to recognize that there are many other themes in the book that are problematic. Data's work has been widely critiqued for promoting a disturbing view of women, namely that they are sexually manipulative, inherently chaotic and emotional, and need to be managed and contained. As therapists working in this space, they have a responsibility to acknowledge these problematic themes and explain the harm they cause. They didn't do that. I've attempted to reach out to the host regarding these concerns. Listeners should approach the content with discernment, seeking resources that prioritize mutual respect, emotional safety, true relational healing. It's unfortunate that the hosts have chosen to promote this book knowing the content, especially when numerous other resources are available that encourage groundedness and self awareness without degrading women.
Okay.
So if we're reading between the lines here, there's somebody who feels like the approach taken in The Way of the Superior Man and some of the other books that we probably reference is probably what would be the right word? Probably a little too toxic when it comes to masculinity.
Yeah, there's certain books that are really important, that are quite um, polarizing in many ways. We talked about Loving What Is and how a lot of people hate that book.
Yeah.
Well, at the top of the list is The Way of the Superior Man. Like people,
And the masculine in relationship
yeah, that book, yeah,
and No More Mr. Nice Guy. Those ones are all kind of polarizing kinds of books.
yeah, and yet we recommend them, um, and so it's interesting because sometimes the principles are hard to stomach when you're coming from a certain um, perspective. Like they're hard to grasp, and there's a lot of your own stuff comes up in contrast to that content. And, for us to be called out for recommending or talking about that book, I'd love this. This is a great opportunity to talk about why. Why do we recommend it? Why do we talk about it? Why is it important? Um, and to acknowledge some things where he might go too far, and why it's uncomfortable. So and that's kind of where Andrew Tate comes into the equation a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
so
I think we, Brannon, would agree with almost everything that is said in this review about what Andrew Tate seems to stand for, at least from our perspective.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Um,
That's why we brought that up, because he would be like the perfect example of what I think is being said in this review about like, hey, if if you're kind of stepping too far off the edge if you're reinforcing this and this and this and this thing. Right.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So, and just side note, yeah, my first time that I read Way of Superior Man, um, I didn't know. Like, I, I didn't love it.
Me
Um,
too, Brannon. The
and,
first couple of chapters, I was like, "Am I even going to finish this book?" Because the way that it was coming across was hitting me in like a way that I was causing me to wrestle with things.
it wasn't until about the third time that I actually read it, and I don't know why I kept going back to it. But the third time that I actually read it, that I started to grasp the essence of it and started to understand what he was actually truly saying. So even me, the first time I read it, I was like, "Whoa, toxic principles. This is really kind of weird and out there." By the third time I read it, what I grasped was, you know what? A lot of what is missing in the men that I'm working with is what he's talking about. A lot of what is missing in the relationships that I'm trying to help them heal and connect more is what he's talking about. That is missing, and that is important to create safety, to create trust, to understand the nature of who we are as human beings. And so it's important. He talks about masculinity, and he doesn't hold back when he talks about the nature of it, and it's uncomfortable. He talks about sexual attraction. He talks about, um, you know, like the feminine a lot. He talks about what it's like to be in a relationship with the feminine. Um,
The polarity between the two of them.
the polarity between the two. He talks about the nature of femininity, and if you put a judgment on it of like, yeah, it's just bad, or then yeah, it's not fun to hear. But if you don't, if you're neutral with the way that you approach the principles that he's talking about, then you can just understand what he's saying. Now,
Yeah, I would
go
say,
ahead.
Brandon, just a caveat to that is that we, acknowledging this, I'm the same as you, Brandon. There's even when I recommend it, I often say to people, "Hey, I don't agree with everything in any one of those three books, but I agree with enough of the principles in there, and I think that's what you're missing, that I feel like you could get some value out of it." So
Mhm.
I'm just going to go out right now and say to everybody, whenever I recommend a book, any book, probably even including the Bible, you know.
Easy.
I mean, I'm sorry, but if we're worried about pornography, then they probably should have taken Song of Solomon out of the Bible, right? So,
Blasphemy.
but no, like honestly, like when I recommend any resource, I'm usually recommending it from a place of I know that Like even there's another book that goes the other direction of where we're going to go today called Worthy of Her Trust. There's so many good principles inside of Worthy of Her Trust, and it is so lacking in masculinity.
Yeah, it's
It,
teach you how to be
it's
weak, and yet
it's
there's a ton of good
there's a
principles.
ton of goodness inside of it,
Right.
and it would still be something that I don't fully agree with, right? Almost every single resource I don't fully agree with, but I look for the principles that seem to apply towards a healthy, wholehearted way of living and healthy, wholehearted relationships. And that's why I would end up recommending those things. But a book like The Way of Superman, if you're coming at it from a perspective of you've been in a relationship where you have actually been harmed by weak or immature masculinity, and then you're being told, hey, my partner's being told to read this book, and the guy comes across in The Way of Superior Man is like, like over the top masculinity, then that's going to feel scary. It's going to feel dangerous. It makes sense why there would be a concern of like, why are you recommending this kind of stuff when I've already been hurt by unhealthy masculinity in the past,
The the
right? That
the
makes sense.
yeah, but it's backwards. So it's like when the betrayed partner comes along and they're like, he can't live those principles. Like that's scary. That's the very thing that is needed is those principles. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of those principles is what is needed in order for trust to be established. In like, if you want your husband to be authentic, then he'll be honest that a lot of those principles are true. And when he's honest that a lot of those principles are true, he's not manipulating for love anymore. And and to be frank, a a weak, broken feminine will not want the masculine to step up. Will not
Because it's
want the
dangerous
masculine
and
to be
scary.
strong. It's dangerous, it's scary, it's not okay. And so they will try to emasculate and keep pushed down. They will, although they hate Mr. Nice Guy, they
They resent them for being weak and inauthentic, but at least they're safe.
well, but they're not safe, but at least they think that they're safe,
Yeah, but
right?
they're actually less safe because now they're living from a place of shame and inauthenticity, which then leads to the very behaviors that led to the problem in the first place.
Right. And so rather than have a man that lives on the edge, rather than have a man that embraces and owns his sexuality, um, rather than have a man who will step up and be honest, even if you don't like it, um, you want a man who is compliant and weak and gives away his masculinity. And so it's uncomfortable. These principles are uncomfortable, especially when you've been hurt by men. It's really uncomfortable to say, I want a man who actually is honestly masculine. And when we talk about masculinity, Tyler, and we're not talking about toxic masculinity. We're not talking about Andrew Tate's version of masculinity.
Yeah.
Um,
We should
and
probably spell that out for a minute, Brannon, on Andrew Tate's version of masculinity, because he has, basically he's created a whole life career very successful in speaking to young men.
yeah,
And what he
yeah.
preaches to young men is, and if you listen to this, there's a whole bunch of truth wrapped up in it,
Principles of truth.
but it's pretty toxic too. But he teaches, like, think about what's being spoken to these young men. These young men are living in worlds where, by and large, they're failing out of schools a lot at a higher clip than girls are now. They're, being more and more disenfranchised with careers, social systems, everything else. And here comes along a man who's like, all right, young men, it's on you to take responsibility for your choices, your success. You are the one who has to learn to become powerful. And when you do, then you will have all of this stuff. You'll have ladies and cars and money and power and that's what will happen if you step all the way into
You
just
just
owning
don't
your
give an
life and
F.
becoming a monster and don't give an F,
Yeah.
right? And now what he's done is he's taken real, true masculine principles about, things about taking personal accountability, being steady, strong, owning your power. Um, but what he does and the end goal, I think, is where it partly goes wrong in terms of making it toxic, is he's a complete narcissist. Like the world evolves around Andrew Tate, which then means he becomes God.
He doesn't care what
which
how other people feel.
and it completely lacks empathy, and it lacks kind of a embracing of reverence for the feminine and for women and all of that stuff. And what to me it's really lacking is higher power. It's
Yeah.
it's lacking it's lacking a higher power, God, purpose, something bigger than yourself, where you take all of that strongness, that strength and power and everything, and then you direct it to the places that God would have you direct it, which in my belief system includes, I'm a father of four daughters. I got my wife. I want to turn around and be a force for good in the lives of my wife and my daughters
Yeah.
as it relates to who God says that I am.
Right.
And if I embrace all of that, that will be me embracing my masculinity. Then I'm going to fight for, revere, protect. And guess what? You can't protect your family unless you're dangerous.
Yes.
Like you have to learn how to be dangerous and harness your danger for good purposes.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just a weak man who can't protect your family,
Right.
right?
So I think the point here is, I think the fear is that if I subscribe to David Dita in the way of the superior man, I'm going to turn into Andrew Tate.
Right.
And I think that, and this is, like I say, the third time I read it and I understood the essence of it. David Dita in that book, in so many ways, does something that Andrew Tate doesn't do. And that's honoring the feminine. That's actually like revering the feminine and honoring the feminine in so many ways. Andrew Tate, for heaven's sakes, owned an OnlyFans business, and that's how he got filthy rich,
Yeah.
objectifying and using
He
women,
took a counterfeit of masculinity and
and made a ton and profited off of it, and then turned around and became this pompous masculine guy that doesn't give an F and is going to live his life. And guess what? He makes a lot of money and he gets a lot of girls.
a lot of people
And
resonate with his message.
yeah, and it's a problem because of the lack of connection and respect and honoring of the feminine. Now, whoever left this review would probably say that's what Dita does. He
Yeah,
does that.
yeah.
He does that. And if you read that, there's just chauvinistic, unhealthy, toxic beliefs about masculinity in there. And I would say maybe there's a few, but there is far more principles of truth in there. And I love what you're saying, Tyler. We could take our favorite book, Wild at Heart, and there is some things that are off base. Believe it or not, I'm gonna say this, and we might lose every audience member we've ever had. But some of Brené Brown's stuff is garbage.
But that's blasphemy, Brannon.
Oh, I know. How dare I? Some of Brené Brown's stuff is so off. And yet
So much of it's really good.
I've appreciated her so much through the
Yeah.
years and what she's brought out and what she's talked about and the principles that she has. So we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here like she wants us to. We're not going to do that. And and we're not I don't want to push anything that harms women ever. And I don't believe that book promotes that. But I do know that book is if you don't understand what he's actually saying, just like if you don't understand what Byron Katie is actually saying, you freak out and you can't handle it. So I'd encourage you to go understand the actual essence of it, not through a lens of I'm going to tear this apart, not through a lens of I'm going to fight against it, but through a lens of I'm going to be open to this and see what he's actually saying. Then come back to us and let's have a conversation. Come on our show, please. I would love to discuss this with you. Any
Yeah.
principle in that book.
I think that's something that, is one of the reasons why I think both of us wanted to speak about this, Brannon, is that when we read a review like this, really the last of our intentions is to diminish a hurt or betrayed woman, right? Like we've seen it. One of my biggest soapboxes, Brandon. How many times have you taught me off the soapbox of like, man, these small men that are just hurting women, like da 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 da. Like I just get so mad and angry. And so it's hard to try to walk a line where part of the answer to creating strong men is to reinforce principles that don't just wrap it all up in a bow and make it nice and pretty. But the heart is actually to create. I mean, like I said, I say this, and I don't say this lightly. I have four daughters. One of them is now married. The other three, one's in college, the other two are in high school. And my first daughter married an incredible man, a man who sticks to his principles. He has a higher power that he cultivates relationship with, and he shows up and he treats my daughter with kindness, respect, authenticity, and strength. He's
He's the man.
he's the exact kind of man that I spend most of my career trying to help other men become. And
Dang,
and
dang, listen to that promotion of son-in-law.
yeah,
Golly,
I don't know if son-in-law even listens to me because he just sees
good
me as
job.
an old windbag. But now with that said, I still have three daughters and that are not married, and they're going to be going into the lone and dreary world looking for a man who will preside, provide, and protect, who will actually show up as a man so that she can be her full self inside the container of that relationship. And I don't say this lightly, but I would welcome every single one of my daughters to marry a man who's in full and authentic recovery. Because a man who's in full and authentic recovery has come to peace with his own shadows. He's learned to take accountability for his own life and make his own choices. He's learned to wrestle with things bigger than himself and cultivate a relationship with a higher power. He's learned how to be empathetic and boundaried. Who doesn't want to be married to that guy?
Right.
That's the kind of men that we're trying to help create in this world so that my daughters have somebody good to marry. And I happen to believe in the resources that I recommend that if you put them together, they all come to this kind of culmination of this is what a good man is.
Right. And they're
And
not perfect
you take Wild at
resources.
Heart, you take Worthy of Her Trust, you take Way of the Superior Man, and you smash all those things together. And what you get is, in my opinion, what a good man should be.
Here, you know what's interesting, Tyler? Like, let's flip the script. One of the problems is there's not the Way of the Superior Woman book. Like there's not healthy femininity books out there. Like
Not real great
if
ones
someone has
that
a
we found.
suggestion that empowers
Please.
femininity and empowers women and talks about, but let's flip the script because I am as passionate and believe in healthy femininity and having that come forth more than almost anything in what I do, because our world needs it, and a healthy masculine wants that. So,
Yeah.
you know, and us promoting masculinity and us talking about the way of the superior man, um, gosh dang it, a good, healthy um, way to step into femininity for women, that would make a lot of weak men uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of weak men fight against it. They would hate that book. And I would love it. I would invite it. Um, so
Brannon,
the
to
go
kind
ahead.
of go along with that, just maybe a story that happened this week. It's funny because these things happen kind of in the same week. We get this review, but then I also was just talking to a woman who's been in a long-term relationship, and she decided to read this book. And she was reading it, and she's like, "Holy cow!" She's like, "Our whole relationship isn't really even about a sex addiction. Our relationship is about the principles of this book."
Yes, yes.
And she said, "Oh my gosh," she said, and then she used an analogy and she said, "I'm a dancer." And she said, "When I dance with somebody, I like to dance with a partner who really knows how to dance and knows how to lead. Because if you're with a partner who really knows how to lead, then all that that partner does is make you look amazing."
Mm-hmm.
Because they know how to touch you, they know how to move you, they know how to make you look beautiful as you're spinning around and going through all of the different moves in the dance. And they make it look so easy that it just makes me look so good.
Yeah.
And she said, "I feel like I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh man, like if I would have had this from my husband and this from my husband and this from my husband, I would have been able to just kind of descend into femininity, and she said, right now I just embrace all of my masculinity because my femininity doesn't feel safe in my current relationship. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. So it's an interesting thing to have one partner say this kind of stuff to me at the same time that we're getting this review and say, okay, like there's probably truth in both sides of this.
I've had several women thank me for recommending that book to their husbands. Like so great. And you know what? They've gone and they've read it, and
They
it was
probably
kind
have the same response you do.
they did, but when they actually like understand it, they love it. They actually really like that book a lot. Um because they understand that there's a lot of truth in there. So this isn't just a book that we hand to men and it's like their playbook to just like go become Andrew Tate.
No, we're not creating Andrew Tates.
No, this is a book that I would say everybody should read and discern and glean whatever they glean from and see how it triggers them and makes them feel. But it's healthy for the man and the woman to understand what masculinity is.
Yeah. I do want to just kind of come back one more time to acknowledging that the world that we live in, Brannon, by the time people find us on both sides, there's already been a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of damage. And, even in what we're talking about here, sometimes on a podcast, we talk about a specific principle and we don't acknowledge the bigger, broader picture. But I acknowledge that there is on both sides, there's probably a heavy dose of trauma, a heavy dose of shame from the past, a heavy dose of probably having been hurt by, the what I would call sort of the counterfeit versions of masculinity
Mm-hmm.
and or weakness inside that. And so I'm in our conversation today, it's not intended to diminish the fact that there is a process and some pain there that has to be acknowledged and worked through.
Well, Tyler, the reality is, and this goes for all of us in anything, is like sometimes you're in a place of development or growth or wherever where you can stomach certain things. Like you're ready and you can process those things. And sometimes you're not. And if you're not, it shouldn't be shoved down your throat. It shouldn't be forced upon you.
Yeah.
And but there's this like process of growth that's uncomfortable where it's like, okay, I'm not quite ready, but I'm going to take a dose of this thing and I'm going to try it on. I'm going to like,
I'll
and
run it through my value system.
and it makes me uncomfortable, but like I want to move beyond. I want to progress, and that's therapy in so many ways. And so yes, I it's true, Tyler. Like we're not trying to force feed anybody anything or get them to do something that they're not willing to do before they're ready. Um, but at the same time, I'm not backing down from principles of truth.
At least the way
And
you see them, right?
at
And
least the
and
way I
and we
see
would
them.
encourage everybody else to do the same thing. Take everything that you receive with a grain of salt, run it through your own value system, and then accept what you feel is true and adjust and let go of the rest. Right?
Tyler, how have you ejaculated up your spine yet?
Well, so yeah,
He doesn't know how to respond to that.
to, well, to your point, Brandon, I want to go to your point to what you're saying and maybe just share a personal part of
I
that
will
with
explain that later, but yeah, please.
yeah, really, really what I think that one is in The Way of the Superior Man, if I
Yeah, it is
remember right.
it's the end of this. It's one of the last chapters. He
Yeah,
talks
it's
about that.
talking about that and really
Anyways,
talking about taking ownership for your own kind of like
you're taking
understanding your own
control
body,
of your
of your own
body and your
sexuality,
sexuality,
not
and
not being ashamed of it, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, no, to your point, Brandon, I was just thinking about my own personal journey and some of the most pivotal books that I've read in my own personal journey. And really, you didn't know this because I hadn't told you that I was already just barely diving into my own personal recovery work, but you actually sent me a copy of Wild at Heart And right when I was like broken, like completely broken, like D-Day had just happened. And when I read Wild at Heart, I ingested that thing just, man, that it just hit me right where I needed it to, right when it needed to hit
Yeah.
me. And like that and Fathered by God became amazing resources. And then later on, I stumbled into and kind of started reading some things, just the normal Patrick Carnes stuff. And then Worthy of Her Trust came along. And there were certain principles of Worthy of Her Trust that were kind of music to my ears at the time, but it didn't quite sit well either all the way with me. And then I was introduced to several other books and I started going on this like masculinity kick and I read tons of masculinity books. But the ones that kind of had me sort of like resonate the most were those ones: Way of Superior Man, Masculine in Relationship. Where there's a third one. Oh, and No More Mr. Nice Guy. Those things all had enough in there that I started to apply some of the principles, and my life kept getting better.
Right.
And my relationship with my wife kept getting better, and my relationship with my kids kept getting better. And I was like, okay, there's something to this, even though that doesn't all feel totally right either. And when I look back at it now, if I would have, and this is the point, is if I would have been given The Way of the Superior Man fresh after D-Day, I
And not
don't
Wild at Heart.
yeah, I don't think I would have received it the same way that I received Wild at Heart. And
Yeah.
so to be fair with that, I think everybody's going to follow their own journey and they're going to be stepping into the stream of whoever they work with. With me, I probably recommend Way of the Superior Man pretty early on to some of these guys who probably maybe aren't quite fully ready for that. And they might even take some of the principles and twist them and not
Right.
quite get them right.
And
But
you and use them in their in their unhealthy ways, and they
maybe
could be used
to
in,
perpetuate more denial or whatever, that's a
yeah, which is
possibility.
not healthy masculinity, by the way.
Yeah, which is why it always has to run back through a true value system. And a lot of times, early recovery, that's what you're trying to uncover again is your value system. So
Yeah.
um, take everything that you ingest with a grain of salt and run it through that way. And I think you might circle back to some of these things and realize that there's a different way of viewing them than the first time you looked at them.
Yep.
And some of them you'll just get rid of. There's been plenty of books that I have no desire to go back and take a look at again, and I don't agree with almost any of it.
Yeah.
So
And that's, I think everybody has that, right? But yes, we do promote principles of healthy masculinity. Absolutely. And we like hate and fight against any type of masculinity that hurts the feminine, and doesn't honor the feminine
that's not real
and doesn't
masculinity.
support the feminine. Absolutely not. That's not okay. Um, and so, Tyler, this has been good discussion. I appreciate your perspective. I remember when we read Way of Superior Man and you hated it.
I told you, I was like, this guy is a total tool shed.
Yeah.
And then I did the same thing as you, where I kind of I said, but I'm going to try to figure out if there's something here that I luckily my DBT training kind of taught me like look for the kernel of truth in everything, and then get rid of whatever else isn't true. And so I was like, there's got to be a kernel of truth here. And then I went back through a second time and listened to it again. And on the second time, I kind of had a similar experience to you, where I was like, okay, now that I've got my own judgments out of the way, what are the principles that are here that I can get behind? And what I heard, and this is the essence of the principles that I feel like took away the most, is you need to stop as a man, you need to stop getting your validation from your wife because she doesn't have your answers. That lined up with Wild at
Which
Heart.
is in Wild at Heart. Yes.
You need to learn to take accountability for your own life, your own actions, your own choices. You need to actually learn how to value your masculinity and provide strength, structure, space, and container in your relationship so that you have a partner who can come to you and treat you like an equal.
And I would add one more: learn how to embrace your sexuality without shame,
Yeah, and that's
which
in there.
which leads to more control and around your sexuality, which
Yeah.
leads to more fidelity, right?
Yeah. And then the other principles that I feel like were being screamed at me through those books were you have to learn how to come to know thyself and own your own authenticity.
Yeah.
And you need to start
Yes.
showing up as yourself in your relationship rather than as what you think everyone around you and especially your
Wants you to
partner
be.
wants you to be.
Yes.
And and then when I started to practice those things, they started to play out as true.
Yeah.
That my wife actually likes a man who is his own being rather than an extension of her. and who is willing to treat her with love, kindness, respect, empathy, and yet be honest, which then allowed her to trust what I was
And
saying
yet be
more.
wild and on the edge and
And to
out
be
there.
dangerous, but to know how to manage that danger now and not go
Yes.
back to the places where I blew her life up. And
Yes.
if I'm not doing those damaging things, but now I'm cultivating that danger in a way that now is like there's a little bit of a wildness there that is actually feels strangely safe to her to know that that's there to be used in the right ways.
Yes.
And not by no means do I have it all mastered, but those things started to play out, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's what I hear.
Yes.
So anyway,
Tyler, this has been awesome. We would love some 5-star reviews from this episode to combat the 1 star we just got. We'd really appreciate it if what you're hearing resonates with you, and this is helpful for you. We would love your reviews. And Tyler, it's interesting. We even love the negative reviews. It gives us good discussion points and
we've had a really
helps
nice
us.
discussion on this, Brannon, and we'll probably
Yeah,
continue it after this is over too. So,
yeah.
and
So thanks for listening, and keep on keeping on.